marketing at Pipestream. And our speaker today is Jackie Dow. Jackie has been with Pipestream for a little over 2 years in both our customer success and go-to-market teams. Jackie has an extensive background in data analytics and started her journey into customer experience at Sling TV, where she helped to digitally transform their customer experience with Pipestream. Jackie is based in Denver, Colorado, so appreciate you getting on so early, Jackie. And she holds a degree from Brandeis University in business. So Jackie, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, Lauren. So today we are going to be talking about omnichannel strategies. I think this is really top of mind for a lot of businesses, especially the bigger businesses out there. And as you mentioned, I have extensive experience with data analytics. And so for me, forming your omnichannel strategy really starts by capturing that customer journey and having a firm grasp on how your customers are using channels. It is one of the harder things to do. I think I call it the elusive customer journey because so many companies try to achieve this, but especially nowadays, you'll find that customer channels are so siloed across companies, and I'm sure we've all experienced it. But these customer interactions are, any interaction you have with a brand is sort of siloed into this channel. So oftentimes, if you switch channels, you're basically starting over. So that whatever happened on the phone isn't necessarily remembered if you go into another channel, and that can be really frustrating as a customer. And likewise, from a data perspective, this is often sort of true in the back end of things, where these channels, these siloed channels, have different databases, and they don't necessarily have a means to connect the data to each other, and so it's very difficult to understand what the actual full end-to-end customer journey is. So we're going to talk about ways to combat that and strategies to kind of get a better picture across the board. And what does it mean to have an omnichannel strategy? I honestly, a lot of companies, they're taking a harder look at it now, but historically don't necessarily even have an omnichannel strategy. Simply having multiple channels where customers can reach you doesn't necessarily mean you have a strategy. And so really the goal is you want a strategy that allows for a flow of information across channels, but also sort of maintaining that context and understanding what your customers are going through. And so as you're forming these strategies, it's important to know the strengths and weaknesses that each different channel has. And so that you can better triage across channels. You want to choose your channels wisely. And again, I think a lot of companies now are starting to take a hard look at the channels that they're offering customers. They're facing headwinds economically. They're trying to cut costs in their call centers. And really, ever since COVID, especially on the phone, agents have been understaffed, wait times are longer. So it really makes sense that you want to focus on a channel that, or decide on a channel that you want to emphasize and have your customers interact with. So let's just quickly go through the main channels here. So you have your non-digital, that's usually over the phone. The pros is it does feel personal as a customer. You tend to, it's sort of been historically the gold standard. Everybody wants to talk to a person. As a customer, you might feel more heard, that you're actually hopefully going to get a resolution. Of course, this is sort of a double-edged sword because oftentimes customers can sort of release a lot of anger or put agents in very difficult situations. So it's something else to consider. But also, I would say easy verification. So oftentimes on the phone, you don't have to remember a password. You can verify yourself more easily, which from a customer standpoint is better. That's all great, but there are a lot of cons to consider. The number one reason being that it's very expensive to have call centers. Um, it's extremely time consuming from a customer standpoint, and this is honestly more because of all of the understaffed call centers nowadays and the wait times being so long. And it is taxing on agents. So, working with clients, what we've learned is that agents would actually prefer to be in a digital channel on a live chat versus on the phone, because being on the phone is very mentally taxing, and oftentimes emotionally stressful. And so, even from their perspective, it's not necessarily preferred. It's very difficult to train staff and also expensive to train staff properly on how to use phones. And it's difficult to collect data because a lot of times you are relying on agents to take notes, to fill out tickets, and properly track anything that's happening with a customer, which is a lot to ask when they're dealing with oftentimes multiple systems and really complex customer problems. And so ultimately, there's just a lot of room for human error. And sometimes it just doesn't happen altogether. So um, your digital channels, so chat, email, SMS, there's a lot of pros to consider in these channels because they're flexible, they're scalable as a business, and they're cheap compared to other channels. And it's so much easier to track data across all these different digital platforms. There are so many different products out there to help you track data. And I think a pro is that it can also be synchronous or asynchronous, meaning customers can decide whether they want to have a live conversation, say over chat, versus, I don't have time for that. Email me later, or, call me back at this time, like basically choosing when they want to be contacted. And then ultimately, and again, why I think there's so much focus around this right now is that these channels plug into automation and AI very easily compared to other channels. And so there's a lot of, savings and, sort of seamless experiences that can be built using those tools. The cons, I would say, would be opposite from the non-digital channels, which is it can feel less personal, especially when it's not done right. Sometimes it feels like you're shouting into a void and no one's listening to you, and that is very frustrating. And it does require you to self-verify or self-authenticate, meaning a lot of times you have to know what your password is to be able to get that help that you need, which can create clunky experiences sometimes. Um, and then finally, we have social. So from a care perspective, customer experience perspective, I would say social is one of the weaker channels. It is important, I think, for brands to have, their a presence on social media. It's good for brand awareness, to have a voice and expression. And it is also very important and useful for tracking customer sentiment about your brand, just overall. But in terms of actually helping customers, it's often very difficult to help people through social channels. They tend to be lower security, so oftentimes, it's just not a good place to verify customers or handle PII or anything like that. And it actually is expensive if you have live agents on these social channels, sometimes even more expensive than voice. And ultimately, due to some of the limitations, it results in low resolution rate for customers, meaning they weren't ultimately able to be helped, which is very frustrating. So again, because of that, some of the limitations within these platforms, it does limit how much you can incorporate automation and AI. It's not impossible, but there are definitely limitations to consider. So, keeping all that in mind, let's talk a little bit about strategies for implementing a seamless customer experience across these different channels. So, it really starts by being able to centralize your data and standardize authentication as much as possible. And so the best way to do this, if possible, as business, and this really has to happen at a high level, like you have to have buy-in from the right people, but regardless of channel, you want to verify your customer as simply as possible and the least amount of PII as possible. And that is going to be important down. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's important. For example, if you're on the phone, a lot of times phone number is a common way to sort of help identify someone's account. If you can then use phone number in chat, so let's say using phone number to text you to, type the code that I just sent you so I know it's you. That is the sort of consistency that is best practice and ideal. If you can have that across channels, it's a better customer experience, but it's also going to help you down the line tie your customer data across channels, which is important. So make it easy, make it consistent. And then again, best practice, if possible, if you can anonymize your customer data. So essentially, some companies will assign a alphanumeric ID, anonymized ID for each unique customer. Doing this opens up a lot of opportunities down the line to use context passing across channels in a secure way. And it also, again, can really help tie customer data together down the line, which is important. So all of that is to say, if you can achieve that, then it opens doors to gather context in digital channels. So Pipestream, for example, what we do at Pipestream is we help customers or we help clients identify customers at the start of sessions as much as possible. We want to create a personalized experience so that we can be confident that we're helping customers. We know who you are, we know where you've been, and basically give them a personalized experience. And we do this because our architecture is super flexible. We can integrate into literally any CRM or business system, whether it's homegrown, as long as it has an API. So what the customer sees is like this nice front end. But on the back end, what we're doing is we're dipping into these systems before even greeting the customer to understand who they are. And doing that, it creates a very seamless experience that makes you feel like, I know who you are as a business and I'm here to help you. So one of the ways to do that, and one of the most common things you might have encountered yourself, is SSO and secure authentication. So again, only certain channels can do this. This isn't so much for social channels, but in digital channels especially, there's a lot of opportunity to sort of context pass across channels, especially if you're triaging. And as long as there is a unique identifier that's being passed across each channel, then this is possible. So the most common example is web, right? So if you're logged in on a website and then you're navigating around, you can't find what you want, you open chat, we should greet you by name. So you've already logged in, we know who you are, we shouldn't be asking for anything from you. We should say, hi, Jackie, I see that you have a payment due. Can I help you with that? And depending on where they've navigated on the site, we can create different personalized experiences and greet them in a way that lets them know, hey, we know who you are, we know where you've been, and we're here to help. And that really can instill confidence in these channels where in the past, people have had very frustrating experiences. Another big example would be phone. So especially nowadays, a lot of clients are implementing what we call IVR deflection. So you call in, wait times are crazy because there's just not a lot of agents being staffed. So you opt in to receive a text message, and in that text message is a link to a digital channel. And that is another opportunity where you can context pass a piece of an identifier that allows us to know who this person is, so that they're not starting over when they open that digital channel. So that brings me to some of these different methods that we typically see to quickly identify customers across channels. I just touched on SSO tokens, so the website example, and this is true whether you want to use a token where we can make an API call ourselves, or some other piece of information that can help us identify a user, like an anonymized ID. And then URL parameters is another really powerful tool, and it's very easy to implement. So for example, in social, we kind of talked about some of the limitations you might face in that channel, not being able to identify or handle personal information. Fine. What you can do is use URL parameters and, again, triage. So you're saying, hey, follow this link for more help, basically. And in the link is some URL parameters that will help us retain context for what this person is looking for, and put them in a channel like chat, for example, that they can self-serve. But again, making sure they're not starting over, greeting them in a way that shows, hey, I know you were just here, and I know that you're looking for payment help. Here's how I can help you. And that is a really important piece. And again, you instilling confidence in the customer that, yes, this is a digital automated channel, but it's smart, and I'm going to be able to help you, which I think is important. So all of that is well and good, but there definitely are some challenges and considerations to keep in mind. So some of the common challenges we've seen in sort of bridging gaps across channels can be token timeouts. So this is often a security thing, and it varies from business to business. But typically, if for that example we had on web, where you're logged in and then you open chat, sometimes those tokens that are being passed to us could be expired or almost expired. So that means that even though we are attempting to make an API call or understand who this person is, we might not know. And so we might have to ask them again to sign in. But I think the big thing here is it really just depends on how long that token lasts for. We find 60 minutes is the perfect sweet spot for security and customer experience. But yeah, that's a more of a security decision. There are varied authentication systems. So kind of going back to the challenges of these businesses having all these channels in a silo with different business owners, and oftentimes different verification systems. And the challenge that poses is it makes it difficult for us to verify people across channels if they're not using the same means of authentication. And so that often takes, the business getting together and sort of understanding how we can consolidate your systems on the back end and make that as unified as possible. And then there's unauthenticated users. I haven't really touched on this. This was more about identifying customers who want to be identified, and who expect you to know who they are and to help them. But in the case of unauthenticated users, cookie tracking is the best way to fill gaps. There are some really powerful tools out there. For example, HubSpot users, a lot of our clients use HubSpot. HubSpot has token tracking and cookie tracking that allows even unauthenticated users to be easily tracked and identified. So that can really help fill the gap, for users who aren't telling you who they are. And then finally, I think the biggest challenge we see businesses face is actually tying all this data together. So even if you are doing best practice work and you have a single identifier for your customer across all these channels, ultimately, I can guarantee you they live in different databases. And so it's really important that businesses invest in having a team of people that can join this raw data together and help you piece together that entire journey. So you know that Jackie is not only a 5-year customer, but she contacted us 3 times this month. She called once, she chatted twice, and each time she was asking about billing, right? And that is the sort of gold standard and the holy grail that businesses are trying to achieve. And all of that can only really be achieved if you have data and you have people who can actually marry that data together. So, yeah. Lauren, do you have any questions for me?
That was awesome. Especially there at the end, that point that you make about having a team, a partnership, right? Like that's what we're really talking about. Yeah, that's huge. I do have questions. People are active over here. So the first one is, so some of the challenges that you were talking about, how do you have kind of recommendations on strategies of how to handle those challenges?
Yeah. So, just I'm going to pop back over here. So, a lot of these challenges really require the business to get together and collaborate across business units, which is often challenging. And we all have, I think, experienced those kinds of challenges. But it does have to come from a high level oftentimes. So with the token timeout, you can't, security is super important, but you do have to balance it with customer experience, right? And so I think it's important to get both groups in the room when making a decision on, for example, how long should a token last? Uh, you know, I've seen it as short as 15 minutes, and that's super secure, but is it necessary? And especially if the whole point of having a token is to sort of create these seamless experiences, you want to make sure that it's going to help the customer, right? So maybe we can negotiate 30 minutes. 30 minutes is a good time for having for a token to last, that we can help a customer. And coming to the table with data and saying, on average, a customer contact, it can last up to 45 minutes, or someone can spend 30 minutes on our website. So let's do that, and I think the same thing, comes with, varied authentication systems. These are sort of conversations that definitely have to happen at a high level, but businesses are already starting to do this. They're really taking a hard look at all of these different disparate systems and different tools that they're using, and they're like, okay, what can we consolidate here and use across all these different channels? And it's a big effort, but it's so important, honestly, not only to save cost, but to create seamless experiences for customers and to be able to have a wealth of rich data about your customers, I think requires this kind of effort.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. That was great. The next question is a little, I would say, probably a little bit in the weeds, but let's jump in it anyways. So, what you had talked about different ways to identify clients. So you said something about phone numbers and maybe even emails. Are there other IDs that clients are using, or like Pipestream clients are using, that might be more useful, or different types of ways to identify them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I do think it does depend on the channel that you're focusing on. And I kind of touched on it a little bit, but having an anonymized ID, I really think for your clients or your customers is really powerful and important when you're putting together these sort of omni-channel strategies. Uh, so I think if you can achieve that, then especially like when we're talking about, for example, passing information via URL parameters, it's so much more secure if you can do it with an anonymized ID. You can pass a phone number in a URL parameter, but then there's some questions about security oftentimes around stuff like that. But in the case of phone, obviously phone number, if someone's calling in, it makes perfect sense to use that as a main identifier. I think you kind of need both. You need a PII that you can decide on, that whether it's phone number or email, that is your unique identifier for a customer. But I do think having that extra step of anonymizing the customer with an ID is just opens up more doors for context passing. But just in terms of a data perspective, deciding on what that is, whether it is a phone number or an email, and have it true for all channels as a way to verify the customer, I think is best practice.
Awesome. I'm all about best practice. All right, Jackie, we're at time. So I would encourage anyone who is listening to reach out to Jackie personally or directly. She is on LinkedIn. You can find her pretty easily. She's regularly featured on our Pipestream page as well. And other than that, I really appreciate your time, Jackie. Our next Pipe Up webinar is next month. I believe in the middle of the month. We'll start posting about that pretty soon. And otherwise, everybody have a great Thursday.
Thank you. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks.